This is going to be my review of the Air75 II Champion Edition. The first 10 minutes are just going to be dedicated to my thoughts, impressions, and suggestions. If you want to see uncut flight footage, then skip ahead 10 minutes and I have 2 full freestyle clips. Right off the bat, this thing is amazing. I was flying with these 3 batteries, the 480, the 580, and the 680. I got 1.5 minutes flying full throttle freestyle with the 480, and I could probably push the battery a little bit further. But after I get to 1.5 minutes and the battery starts to hover around 3.4 volts, and doing punch outs brings you to below 3 volts. This thing pulls a lot of current and has a lot of really aggressive voltage sag. With the 580s, I get about 2 minutes of freestyle. 2.5 if I'm taking it a litlittle bit easy. The added capacity helps to mitigate the voltage sag a little bit. If you're just cruising around, then I got 5.5 minutes, which is really good. The 580 is a really good balance where the extra weight doesn't really affect the drone too much, but you do get a good amount of additional flight time. With the 680, I got about 7.5 minutes cruising around, but this is a lot of additional weight, and it does start to weigh the drone down. Like if you're pulling out of a dive, you really gotta full throttle it, otherwise you'll just crash into the ground. So it does affect the agility of the Air75. But it's a really good for cruising around, or if you're a beginner, and you'll get a really long flight time and you'll have a lot of time to practice. That's why I often don't like to suggest Air65s to beginners, because they have such a short flight time. You only get like 3 minutes of flight time, even just cruising around. And it's really hard to practice if you're still a beginner. That's why I recommend the Air75 or the Meteor 75 Pro for if you're a beginner, because you'll get significantly more flight time. It's also worth noting that these batteries aren't really in new condition, so you might get even better flight times than what I'm getting. The Beta FPV really has been stepping up their game this year. The original Air75 had these horrible 802 motors, which are like 23,000 kV. These are atrocious. I have so many of these and I don't use them because they're just so bad. I ended up immediately switching to the RC Empower 802s or the Newbie Drone 802s. I don't like the Newbie Drone 802s as much for an Air65 because they're heavy. They're as heavy as an 803, even though they're an 802, without really delivering much additional performance. But Beta FPV really has been improving their motors. These are so much better than the previous generation. I wouldn't say that they're better than RC Empower, but they're really close. RC Empower is like the golden standard for motors. They have a good balance of everything. They're efficient, they're powerful, and they're durable. The Beta FPV motors do have good power, and they actually might be more efficient. But I don't know what the durability is like since I've only had these for like 3 days. They improved the flight controller as well. Now you've got 12 amp ESCs, which do deliver a good amount more power, but indoors you won't really notice it unless you're like a top tier racer. If you fly outdoors, then you'll definitely notice the improvements, especially during punch outs. There's a lot more headroom and there's a lot more agility than what you get with the original, 5 amp ESCs. But another improvement is this flight controller is no longer connected to the front grommet on the frame. And this is very important because with the older 5-in-1 flight controllers, once you hit something head on, it starts to bend the frame, and that damages the flight controller up front. Up front is normally the ELRS receiver. This is what the old 5-in-1s look like. As you can kind of see, this is bent upwards, and the ELRS receiver no longer functions. But the new 5-in-1 only has 3 points of contact, so it's less likely that you're going to damage it from a forward collision. I did manage to take this flight controller out. The VTX is no longer broadcasting, but that was after months and months of severe impacts into concrete, trees, literally everything. I was so aggressive with this drone. I still think that Beta FPV's 3-in-1 flight controller is their most durable flight controller. It's very, very rare that I kill this flight controller. And I've had this for a really long time, and I've only killed maybe 3 of them. And they've been like upside down collisions where the whole frame just flexes. But with this flight controller, I've only had 3 of them, and I've killed 1. I have damaged 2 of them, but I was able to fix 1 of them. The one that I damaged, I cracked the gyro chip right here, and I had to replace that. And what's interesting is I was actually able to replace it with a gyro chip on this flight controller. So if you're good enough at soldering, then that's something you definitely can do. But let me tell you, it's not easy replacing that chip. This is basically what it looks like after the first test flight. I was being pretty aggressive with it. I crashed it a bunch of times into trees, into other solid objects. And it did survive. I did lose the original antenna. This antenna is not glued down, and you should glue this down. On my other drones, I have it glued down, and I used T7000 adhesive for doing that. You can also use E6000 or B7000. This adhesive is a bit stronger, so this is what I prefer to use. Enough impacts can start to loosen this up, and then you'll start to have issues where the camera grays out once you crash into something. Some more improvements that you can make. For me, I'm probably going to carve out the intersection and use these battery slings to save weight. I'm also going to be switching over from metal screws to PEEK screws. And this also detaches pretty easily. You can also glue that down, or I made this 3D print that wraps around it and covers it, and I'll release the files for that soon. If you don't care too much about weight, then you also might want to put like a little pad in between the flight controller and the camera, because this canopy can bend and collapse, and it can cause the camera to slam into the flight controller and cause damage to both of them. There's a little bit too much slack on these motors, and what could happen is if you crash upside down, the impact can cause the motor wires to flip up and it'll get stuck on the props. And that's like the biggest cause of wire damage for the motors. I might be nitpicking a little bit, but I don't like the color of this frame. Gray is a horrible choice, because once you crash, it is so difficult to find this thing. I spent like 40 minutes just searching for this after I crashed. One of the impacts that I had caused the battery to detach early, so I had no idea where the drone went. I had to look back at the flight footage and retrace my steps to figure out where the trajectory of the drone would have been. But it still took me like 40 minutes because this thing is gray, and it's so hard to find if you're flying in like a park. It just blends in so well. This is the stock frame. This is how they send it out, but I'm definitely going to be switching it over to a more vibrant frame so I can more easily find it when I crash. Also, kind of unrelated, but if you're going to be flying through trees in a park, then you also might want to get yourself a little throw line. That way you could fish your drone out of a tree once you crash. I immediately crashed this thing into a tree 2 different times, and both times would have been a loss if I didn't have this. So it's definitely something you want to get if you're just getting into the hobby and, flying in parks around trees. If you're flying in an open area, it doesn't really matter, but this is so helpful for fishing your drone out of high places. Here's some more things you could do to improve the durability. Beta FPV's C03 camera does have some adhesive on it protecting the wires, but it's not going to protect the camera from snapping off if you crash severely enough. So what I advise doing is getting yourself some strong adhesive like T7000 and going all the way around the perimeter of the sensor. Yeah, you could just fully encase it in adhesive and then it won't break off anymore. Also, if you find that you're breaking the standoffs to the frame, here's what you can do. Cut off the standoff and just drill from this side upwards, and then you could just fix it down with a screw. For my Air75, I'm actually using nylon screws, and they have replaced the standoffs, and these almost never break. If you're concerned about weight, then you could also get these PEEK screws from Beta FPV. They work really well for an Air65, but for 75, they do tend to break a bit more often. See how my Air75 is already missing a screw. But yeah, that's my review for the Air75. This is great. If you're contemplating getting it, get it. I love this so much more than the original Air75. With the original Air75, I just went straight into modding it because I did not like the performance. I love the original Air65. It was a while before I had to mod that, but the Air75 just didn't measure up. So I had to swap out the motors, swap out the props, and now it's really aggressive. But the Air75 Champion is just aggressive right out of the box, and I love it. If you're on the fence about getting an Air75 or an Air65, if you're going to be flying only indoors, then the 65 is better since it's easier to fly indoors. But if you're going to be alternating, then the Air75 is so much better. It's also better if you're a beginner because you'll have more flight time. If you're a beginner with an Air65 or a similar ultralight, they have such short flight time that it's really annoying trying to practice with it. You get like 3 minutes of flight time for each battery, and the moment you start to get the hang of flying, the battery's done. But with these, you can get an absurd amount of flight time, like 7.5 minutes, 8 minutes. It's crazy. And yes, you'll only get that cruising, but it's so good if you're just trying to learn. Alright, I'm gonna stop talking now, and the next 6 minutes is just gonna be uncut freestyle. Both these flights are done with the 580 battery.